Welcome back to NY Flight Jets Talk. This is show number 2 on the day. If you missed the show earlier, go back and check it out after you're done watching this. I was joined by Jets legend Wesley Walker. This show, we are joined by Micheal Nania of Jet X Factor. Micheal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. So glad to be here on this illustrious show. You're coming up really quickly. I think in due time you're going to be one of the biggest Jets talk guys out here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. First time on the show. Hopefully not the last. Let's get right into it. So, who do you think what do you think is a position of need in this draft that the Jets need to look to upgrade in that no one is really talking about?
That no one is talking about. I would say looking at everyone knows that the Jets need offensive line help, but I would say something that may in terms of that specific group that maybe isn't getting talked about a lot is the need to kind of build the interior offensive line, the pipeline of that position in the later parts of the draft. We all know there's a high chance they're going to draft a tackle in the first round who's probably going to step in and start, but you look at the interior, and they have great pieces there, obviously, with Joe Tippmann at center. Elijah Vera Tucker, we'll see if he plays guard or tackle, but if he plays guard, they're probably going to need another guard in addition to that. But they don't really have a pipeline of talent there. And I think it's really important to have that going on your offensive line. So, when guys get hurt or they get old or they sign with another team, you have young guys who have been developing in your system who are ready to step up. Because it's not always ideal, as we've seen with the Jets in recent years, to have a hole and need to fill it in free agency with expensive veterans who may or may not be able to transfer their production to your team. I think you look at the best teams in the league, especially the teams with the best offensive lines, whether you're talking about Baltimore, San Francisco, Philly. Like there's a lot of drafted and developed talent that isn't even necessarily from the early parts of the draft. You look at Baltimore; they have a guy starting for them this year, John Simpson, who was he wasn't even drafted by them, but he was a late round pick that they picked up and developed. Jason Kelsey, the Eagles, obviously was a sixth round pick, I believe. Jordan Mailata was, I believe, a seventh round pick. So to be a really elite offensive line for a long time, you got to draft and develop late round picks, have those guys ready to come up. And right now, the Jets don't have a lot of that in the back end of that depth chart. So in addition to drafting someone round one and getting a blue chip talent who's probably going to start, I think it's important to just don't stop there and add some more pieces in the back half of this draft that could be developed and be a part of the pipeline for the future.
I agree. You mentioned the interior offensive line. There's a lot of depth in this class in the later rounds, especially when it comes to interior offensive line. You have guys like Cooper Beebe, you have Christian Haynes, you have Trevor Keegan and Zach Zinter, both guards out of Michigan that are supposed to go in similar positions in that class. You also have a lot of talented wide receivers that are going to fall in the later rounds. And then the quarterback room, I think, is very talented for day 3. I think this draft class is one of the most talented draft classes we've seen in a long time. I think they have every position on all 3 days. And I think if you want to go out and get something, you can. We can bring in a day 3 defensive tackle to complement Quinnen Williams. I think that's key. And obviously, wide receiver, we can always add someone in the 3rd, 5th round or whatever that is, kind of just plug and play. I think linebacker is something to look at, and also safety is something to look at in free agency and the draft. Free agency, you can maybe bring in a C.J. Gardner-Johnson, a veteran guy who can kind of come in and be that day 1 starting safety. Or you can maybe try to take a swing at a guy on day 3 who can kind of come in, and maybe we re-sign Chuck Clark and he learns under Chuck Clark for a year or two. And then we have him, Tony Adams, and then obviously draft someone down the road is the future of that room. We need to upgrade a lot of positions, every position on the offensive side of the ball. And then I also look and I think we need a defensive tackle, and a safety.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you on all of that, especially with some of those defensive holes you mentioned. Because offensively, I mean, we all know the story there. There's nowhere to go but up at pretty much every position. So that speaks for itself. But I still think there's some work you can do with the defense because, like, obviously they have a great core of star young players who hopefully are going to be here for a long time, and it's already one of the best defenses in the league. But I do think there is some room for them to get even better, to move from great, elite, whatever you want to call them, to being the best defense in the league. I think they still have some room to grow to get to that point, to become even more dominant. And some of those things you mentioned, I think, are ways to get there. The defensive tackle position, I think beyond Quinton Williams, you want to bring back Quentin Jefferson. I think that's important because he had a very good season for them, especially as a pass rusher. But then beyond that, like, I think you can strengthen the run stopping on the interior. Al Woods obviously was filling that
Yes.
early last season, but he's a free agent. He's coming off the Achilles, and he's very old at this point, so it doesn't look like he's coming back. So that's a hole that you're going to want to fill. And after he went out, you did really feel that it was subtle, and he didn't really make many tackles when he was playing or put up any stats. But when you look at his film and you look at the impact he was making, he did help the run defense with his ability to plug gaps. Now I think and I've talked about this, his lack of pass rushing hurt them because he did absolutely nothing as a pass rusher. So I think you want to find someone who could stuff the run to a strong level, but also give you a little bit in the passing game, because that's important for how the Jets play defense. They want to get after the quarterback with 4, but that run defense did suffer a little bit after Al Woods went out. So trying to find a way to plug that up. And then at safety, I think there's room for improvement. I like Tony Adams. I think he's going to be a good piece for this defense going forward, but I thought Jordan Whitehead had a really rough season next to him.
I agree.
So I think that's a spot where they could improve significantly, is that starting safety spot next to Tony Adams.
I agree. Yes, safety is a huge priority. You mentioned Al Woods there. Al Woods, he tore his ACL in that Broncos game, I believe. Yeah, it was the Broncos game. Al Woods, that game, had a safety. His run blocking was decent this year, but I just think the ACL, I thought he was going to retire after this year the way it was, but that ACL sure does not help. I think he's retired. I think he's retiring. A guy I like to look at in the draft is Dwayne Carter, interior defensive lineman out of Duke. I think he's a solid prospect to look at in the later rounds, maybe. But you can also, I haven't looked at the free agent class yet for the interior defensive lineman, but free agency is always a great time to go out, and then maybe you trade a later pick. Maybe you trade a 4th-round pick for some guy who can kind of come in and maybe be a backup, because I personally think we have a starting defense, 2 starting defensive tackles, obviously, in Quinton Williams, and also I think in Solomon Thomas. I think we bring Solomon Thomas 1 year, $4 million, something in that type of realm, so to speak. I think he had a very, very solid year, and I think the Jets are just a cheap player that can come back. I mean, he had 5 sacks last year. He was great against the run and pass. I think we need to bring him back. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he had an improved season. His first year here, I thought, was a little up and down, especially in the run game. But this year he came back, and he was a lot. He gave them what I thought he was going to give them when he came in, because when he played with the Raiders the year prior to when he came to the Jets in 21, I thought he had a good year because didn't really work out the Niners as a 1st-round pick, but he went to the Raiders. He moved to the interior versus playing on the edge where he was in San Francisco, and I thought it was a good fit because he used his athleticism to win against guards on the inside. He was a good pass rusher for them. He had 3.5 sacks, 12 quarterback hits that year, so I thought that's what you're going to get. First season with the Jets, didn't get too much of it, but this year, like you said, he bounced back. He had the 5 sacks. I thought his run defense was improved as well. So, yeah, I think you have a piece with him. You get Quentin Jefferson back, and you're doing well there. There's you don't want to set the bar too high. Not many teams have 4 superstar defensive tackles, but at the same time, I think the bar is really high for this Jets team because they do have the ability to be the best defense in the league, in my opinion. So I think if you could bring those 2 guys back and get someone else in there who's a good run stuffer, but also a scheme fit by being able to be athletic and shoot gaps in this 4-3 attacking defense, I think you could have a very complete interior group, and you complement that with what they have on the edge and at linebacker. Then I think the run defense can catch up to where the pass defense was this year and hopefully make it a very strong two-way defense that could compete to be the best in the league.
I agree. You mentioned Quentin Jefferson there. Obviously, he's a free agent. Staying on the topic of re-signing free agents, if I'm Joe Douglas, the second that negotiating period or whatever free agency opens, I'm calling Justin Hardy, Thomas Morstead, and Greg Zuerlein and say, bring your agents to the facility right now. We're getting this deal done. I think this unit is top. I think this team is top as a top tier special teams unit, and I think it starts with bringing all of them back. Whether we lock Greg the leg up for like a long-term deal, so to speak, for a kicker, which is probably like 3 years. They said it could be similar to Cairo Santos's deal, which was 4 years, $16 million. Just don't see that happening. I think we're probably looking more at like a 1 year, $3-4 million deal. Hardy, you're probably looking at like a 1 year, $2.5 million deal, and then probably similar for Morstead. Cheaper guys that you just need to bring back because that special teams unit was really effective this year. What about you, Michael?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I really think what the Jets did by bringing these two guys in here is what they should have done for a long time. There was a long stretch there where they were getting young kickers. They drafted some players. Braden Mann was a draft pick they had. Lachlan Edwards at punter, and then at kicker, it almost seemed like they weren't trying. They're just getting undrafted guys, scrap heap guys, and just kind of making them battle it out. They wanted that long-term solution, which I understand, but with kickers and punters, I mean, as Zuerlein and Morstead showed you, age doesn't matter as much at this position as it does at others. Guys can go really deep into their 30s and still play very well, sometimes into their 40s. So, I mean, there's always an opportunity to just get really effective punters and kickers for 2-3 million, whatever it is, if you're
Yes.
just willing to have a veteran and, not, obviously these guys aren't going to be here for the next decade or anything like that, but they gave you an awesome season, the both of them last year, and there's no reason to think they can't do it again next year. So I'm on board with you on that. Definitely want to get both of those guys back.
Yeah, and like Morstead, arguably, I personally, it's probably top 2, top 3 in the AFC. I don't think he's at the level of AJ Cole. I think AJ Cole is one of the greatest punters as of late in the NFL. I mean, that guy just has a bomb of a leg. Greg Zuerlein, obviously a top kicker in this league. He's had his leg strength is great and his accuracy is also great. I think he missed like 1 or 2 field goals this year. Might have been. I remember he missed one in the Dolphins game that we watched. Did he miss one in the 30-0 game? I don't know. I know he missed one, at least one. Special teams unit though, non-negotiable, needs to come back. But we need to still upgrade. Just literally almost every position can use an upgrade on this team. If you look, well, every offensive position, most defensive positions, and when it's staying with upgrade, like a lot of people mentioned Bryce Huff coming back as maybe sustaining him as our long-term edge rusher. Here's the thing, we can't tag him anymore. The deadline passed yesterday at 4 p.m. So it's either we lock him up long-term or bye-bye, he's gone. I personally, I would pay him up to $16-15 million a year. I don't think he would take that deal. I'd rather spend, if he's probably going to get, I think around $20 million a year, if not higher. I'd rather personally spend that money in going out and bringing in a Tyron Smith, going out, bringing in a Mike Evans type of guy. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, it is a really interesting situation because you have a player who's going to get a very big contract this offseason. To what extent, we'll have to see what that number ends up at. But this player is going to get a big contract who hasn't really gotten the playing time you usually see out of players who get that money. And obviously the Jets gave him more snaps this year than they did the previous season. But still, it's a projection. That's what makes him an interesting type of guy to invest in, because I think whoever gives him that contract, you're going to play him more against the run, play him more snaps overall, and you have to see how he would hold up with that. For me, I think I really think they should get him back at whatever price he's looking for, just because like he's a premium pass rusher on the edge, and that's about as premium of an as premium of an asset as there is in the league. I mean, beyond, offensively, you have your quarterback. That's obviously number one. Protecting him is probably number two. And then after that, it's can he get off the edge and get after the quarterback? And the way he played this past season, I think.
We lost you there, I think. Michael? All right, I think Michael's. Michael? Guys, did you guys lose him also, or is it just me? I think we might have lost him. Try this. Oh. Michael? Frozen? Snowball said frozen. All right. Lost him. Anyway, guys, back to what he's saying. Michael will join us when his screen looks like he just left. Michael will join us when his screen is back. But back to what he's saying. He personally thinks we need to lock up Bryce Huff. And I think a lot of Jets fans do think that. And it wouldn't be a bad move to lock up Bryce Huff. I really just don't want to overpay for Huff. If we can get him at $16 million a year, let's say 4 years. 4 years, around that 40, that kind of range, the high 40s, low 50s for maybe 4 years. I would do that deal personally. I just don't want to pay him over $20 million. And I think he's 100% going to chase the money. Wherever the money is, he's going to go after that. And good for him. He's earned himself the right to do that. Undrafted free agent, comes in right away and just absolutely dominates. But NY Jet superfan, Huff isn't worth more than 14 mil. Some would argue that because we haven't seen him play enough snaps, and I respect the people that like NY Jet superfan who argues that we haven't seen him play enough snaps. So that's why I think 15 is the deadline. We're kind of similar in price, NY Jet superfan. We haven't seen him play enough snaps to look and say this guy we're gonna pay $20 million a year. We haven't done that, and that is a problem. We can't go out and just spend money, $20 million a year, for a guy who hasn't played a ton of. Well, he's played a good amount of snaps, just not a ton. Guys, it looks like Michael's internet went out. He just messaged me. So it looks like we've lost Michael for the rest of the show. Submit your questions in the chat, and I'll try to respond. Obviously, I see Snowball and NYJet Superfan questions there. I'll go ahead and answer that. Gibson was questionable as a return man. Do we stick with him or seek help elsewhere? I don't know. I think you can kind of draft someone who can maybe just kind of, learn maybe for a little. I think Gibson is serviceable. I think he can start next year. I think he didn't have his best year, but I think that is serviceable. All right, here we go. We got Michael back. Michael, are you with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Trying to get you on the. Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yep, I got you. I rejoined on my phone. Sorry, my internet went out. I don't know. Terrible timing for that.
No, of course it's totally fine. Snowball had a question for you. Gibson was questionable as a return man. Do we stick with him or seek help elsewhere?
I would say competition. You definitely want to get some competition in there. I mean, he'll still be around. I think you could include him in that competition, but I think outside of, and it's weird that it happened in the first game, but outside of that one play, really the rest of the season, there wasn't much there to like. And, part of that can be the blocking sometimes. It's the whole unit. It's not just him, but he did have, I think, at least 2 other muffs and fumbles outside of that game. So his hands were questionable. Definitely want some competition, whether that's late in the draft, a veteran type guy. I would say that's the one area of the special teams that could be improved.
I agree. I think we can just bring in someone maybe to compete. I know he had a great week 1 and didn't have like an incredible rest of the year. I thought he looked good when we got him involved in the actual like offense, so to speak, like throwing him passes and stuff. Personally, I think he could bring someone in to compete, but at the end of the day, he did win us week 1, so I am going to give the kid a ton of credit. I mean, to go out there and bring home that kick return touchdown to win the game, you got to give him credit. I know it wasn't great, but I still like him. I think he could be a solid maybe. I think we could use him in the actual offense the way that the Chiefs use McCole Hardman. I think, or the way we thought we were going to use McCole Hardman, kind of as a jet sweep type of guy, maybe run like a flea flicker with him or something. I think he isn't not an asset, but someone valuable on this offense in the near future. Maybe can come in and compete for a wide receiver 3 type of spot. NY Jets super fan. I can't see us filling our holes. Safety 2, defensive tackles, kicker, punter, third lineman, running back 2, quarterback 2, wide receiver 2. This offseason without a second round pick, all the dead money changed my mind.
Yeah, it's going to be tough missing that second round pick. And obviously, the Jets have struggled with second round picks, but that doesn't change the fact that it's a great asset to have. I mean, oftentimes, like first round talent slips into the second round, and you find instant. I think the first 2 rounds, and obviously, first round is um, generally more productive than the second, but I really think the first 2 rounds are, closer than second to third, if you know what I mean. Like, I think second round, you can still get first round quality talent into that round. So it's a key loss that they're going to be without, and they don't have any other extra picks either. They'll probably get some maybe seventh round compensatory picks, if any. But yeah, the assets this season are limited. They don't have a great collection of draft picks. They don't have a ton of cap space as much as we're used to seeing them have. So they're going to have to be economical. And I think this is where Joe Douglas is really going to be tested. Can he find free agents for $4 or $5 million to fill certain holes, like a starting guard spot or a third receiver, a third tight end? Like, can he fill these holes with cheap contracts, cheap veterans, late round picks, undrafted free agents? That's where he's really going to be tested. And you look at so many of the great teams in the league, like we talked about offensive line before and late round picks. These teams aren't always built with you know, first round picks, big free agents. Like you look at the Chiefs, they have a seventh round running back, Isaiah Pacheco out there. They have how many random guys at receiver from all parts of the draft and free agency. You don't always have to build your team with all premium assets. So it's going to be tough, but if Joe Douglas is going to lead the Jets to a Super Bowl at some point in his tenure, he's going to be able to find ways to solve these issues this offseason without the premium assets.
I agree. You mentioned filling those spots. Personally, I don't think it's only filling those spots, which is a testament to Joe Douglas. I think it's the guys who we bring in have a flash or two, maybe have a nice interception or a nice touchdown run. I think they need to show a flash or two also, not just kind of come in and not really be great, but you also meant, well, I shouldn't say great, not really be average or just a little below average. I think they need to come in and be competent at least, to say the very least. I I think quarterback 2 though is so important because we can't have him and then have like a Zach Wilson type of guy. There's been all this Sam Howell trade speculation. What are your thoughts on that? I'm not buying it. If we were to bring in a Washington quarterback, I'd rather bring in Jacoby Brissett. What about you, Michael?
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, we were just talking about not having a second round pick. I don't think there's a need to give up more draft picks for a guy like Howell, who has some upside because he's younger. But this is a team that's built to win now. They already put a lot of chips into winning this year or next year. Hopefully, Aaron Rodgers comes back. But short term with Aaron Rodgers is what they're invested in. So I think they need to retain these draft picks and everything that they can to win now. And in terms of that backup quarterback spot, I think you want a guy who has a long track record of showing you he can be relied on as a backup quarterback. I don't think Sam Howell has done that. So I would rather Jacoby Brissett, like you mentioned, I think is probably at the top of my list. But you put Gardner Minshew in there. There are a few other Jameis Winston, Ryan Tannehill, like Tyrod Taylor. There's a few of those veteran quarterbacks who have started, and you can rely upon to say, okay, if this guy comes in, we have a below average starting quarterback as their backup quarterback. So I think that's the type of guy they should look at.
I agree. Tyrod Taylor, would you consider maybe like a Tyler Huntley type of guy who's been a backup but not a ton of experience?
I mean, I guess it depends on how free agency plays out and what kind of budget they have because some of these quarterbacks they're going to get decent contracts. I mean, I think Jacoby Brissett last year signed for 8 million on 1 year. We know Mike White got a pretty solid contract when he left the Jets, and he didn't even have the sample size that some of these guys do. So you do have to pay a good price to get some of these quarterbacks. So if they do get priced out because they're spending on linemen, spending on receivers, whatever it may be, potentially. But for me, I definitely want to see them prioritize that QB2 spot, get one of the top guys, and make sure that if Aaron Rodgers goes down, the season doesn't have to be over.
I agree. We need someone who we can trust back there. Our boy PD in here. Connor, great job as always. Thank you, PD. Question for Michael. How much money will the Jets free up for free agency?
Yeah, I mean, they do have a good amount of flexibility to open up more space. I think Spot Track has them at like 7 million right now, which is about 20th in the league. So obviously they won't operate with that. I think you're looking at more restructuring, which the Jets already did plenty of last offseason. So this is going to catch up to them at some point. But again, they're already invested in this with Aaron Rodgers trying to make it work right now. So I think they have to continue going in on that. And I think we'll see more restructures with some of the veteran players who you're planning on keeping, push some money back. I think you'll see cuts with guys like Laken Tomlinson, CJ Uzama. Those are the top two that come to mind. So I think when it's all said and done, you'll probably see them in the mid 30s, maybe close to 40 as a best case scenario. Obviously, Zach Wilson is likely to get traded. That's going to clear up a good amount. So they'll end up with a good number. They're just not going to be. I mean, we've seen off seasons where they come in with like 80, 90 million to spend. They could just compete with everybody. It's not going to be like that.
Yeah.
But I do think they're going to get to a point where they have enough flexibility to get one or two free agents that they really want and be aggressive towards those guys, and then get a good quantity of players to fill in holes across the board.
I agree. I want enough money where we can kind of go after a superstar, so to speak, maybe like a Mike Evans type of guy, or let's say Tyron Smith becomes available. Those type of guys, I feel like, would be solid guys to bring in. Michael, you want to take some calls?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, we got Johnny joining the show. Johnny, how you doing today?
Hey, what's up, Nania? What's going on, Connor? And Nania, quick question for you, man. I did want to ask this. With the free agency coming up, right? And I did see that the Patriots tackles are out there, which is Trent Brown and Mike Anibu. I can't pronounce his last name or anything, right?
Yeah.
If we were to take those two right now, let's just say free agency, in the draft, we still pick up another offensive lineman, so your Fuaga, JC Latham, because I think they'll be in there for around the time that we're trying to draft, because I feel like Fashanu will be gone, right? Would that solidify the actual line itself, and then we could worry more in the third round or possibly getting some help for Garrett Wilson? Just wanted to ask you and let me know what you think of that, just because I feel like then the depth pieces would be your Max Mitchell, your Karen Warner, your Wes Schweister, and things like that. So thinking of more in the future than anything, as well as a plug and play right now. Appreciate you guys.
For sure. I mean, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because I think what most Jets fans, and I probably am on the same page, but what I think most Jets fans are kind of picturing is you get a big receiver, you get a tackle in free agency, and then we're going to draft another tackle in the first round. But the plan you laid out, I think that is another possible way they could go, is to just go all in on the offensive line, because we all know how much of an issue it is. Definitely bigger than receiver, which is also a huge issue. So I could see them doing something like that. Maybe not with the two guys you mentioned specifically, because I think both Trent Brown and Onwenu, I'm pretty sure that's what it is, but he does have a weird name. I think both of those guys are going to get north of 10 million a year. They're going to be in eight figures. Because they both did play really well last year. They've track records as starters. Onwenu is a lot younger too, so I don't know if the Jets can afford both of those guys specifically, but in terms of the structure of that plan, like get two starting tackles, draft one, so then you could have that security in case that guy's not ready. I could see that plan, and then maybe kind of put receiver back towards the later parts of the draft, or in free agency you sign like mid-level receivers instead of the stars. I could see that if they really want to go all in on the offensive line, but I do feel like they want to get a big time receiver next to Garrett, like Connor you mentioned. Mike Evans, I do think they would be in on him if he is legitimately out there fielding offers, which it seems like he's going to be. So I do think they are going to try to leave room for a big receiver addition, but I could see them going the route of like let's get two veteran tackles and still draft one, so we could have the security and the short term, both the long term upside and the short term security.
I agree. You mentioned the Michael O option out of
Yeah.
New England. A lot of people have been talking about him on the Jets Twitterverse. Obviously, you made a free agent profile on him, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that was the guy who I was interested in. Who I read the profile about. I really like him. The money. I don't see him coming to the Jets. I don't know. I think they're gonna kind of go after someone cheaper, unless maybe we look at Tyron Smith's film and he's great, and we go out and we're like, okay, we're gonna make a move on him. But I really just don't see that. One more question / it's more like a statement from Wild Wave actually. Before we let you go, only restructures I'm doing is CJ is Quinnen, CJ, and maybe DJ. I prefer to trade DJ Reed since I don't see him in our future plans.
I mean, I think they should stick with Reed just because he's young enough to, get another extension from them and still play well throughout that. And he's been so reliable through his last season with the Seahawks and his first two with the Jets. He was very consistent across those 3 seasons. And he's still going to be, he just turned 27 last November. I trust DJ Reed enough to sign him to another extension after this contract is up. So I would stick with him and not trade him. But yeah, in terms of the restructures, it will be interesting to see what they do because like we said, they already did a lot of that last offseason to make it work with Aaron Rodgers and some of the other contracts. So they already are backloading plenty of money. Are they going to double down and do more of it this offseason? That will be interesting to see. So in terms of what they do with those restructures, that's what's going to tell us how all in are they on this team. Because, like we said, they already did a lot of it. So are you going to double down and really go all in to make sure you can maximize this for Rodgers? I think the restructures are what will tell you how committed they are to that.
I agree. Johnny, I see you. Happy birthday, Mr. Bonesy, guys. Michael, thank you for joining us. Any final thoughts?
No, I mean, I was just so glad to finally come on here. I've been seeing what you've been doing. It's pretty awesome. And hopefully I can come back again at some point, especially during the season. Hopefully we'll have some fun stuff to talk about.
Thank you. I've been telling all my guests, love to get you back on when all things Jets finally pick back up. These are going to be a rough few weeks with no really action in any sports. I mean, spring training just started for baseball. We still have the hockey and basketball season, but the All-Star break just ending. Finally getting back into some things. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, JETS, 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 Jets.